when those games are a little bit more high pressure and high stakes, just be a little bit more aware of who's showing nerves. Because I say this a lot. Athletics is about having enough nervousness that shows you care, but not so much nervousness and nerve that you're paralyzed and can't play freely. Because you need to be able to do both. You need to be able to be focused, right?
Well, welcome back to this next interview with our athletic titans. And I am so excited today to introduce you to a man I've actually known for a very long time, way back in the day. It's a man that, I used to see in the halls all the time and at the athletic facilities back when I played at Creighton. And lo and behold, we reconnected, 23 years later. We'll try to figure that out, that timeline, when I get Jim on. But I'm so excited today to introduce you to Creighton women's head basketball coach, Jim Flanery. A little about Jim and his background. He is now just finished up his, 22nd year with the Creighton Blue Jays. He's been there longer than that as well. But after taking the Blue Jays to their 6th NCAA tournament in 2023. He is Creighton's all-time victory leader and has guided Creighton to 6 of the 9 NCAA tournament appearances in women's basketball history. They reached the big dance in 2012 and 13, 2017 and 18, 2022, and again in 2023. I just was watching them on TV, but just a couple weeks ago at this point. And when you look back at the runs they've had in the tournament as of late, right, especially that 2021-22 campaign, absolutely historic for that program because they reached the Elite Eight with victories over Colorado, number 8 Iowa, and number 10 Iowa State. His focus, I absolutely love this, and I pulled very specific things to tell you about Jim here in a minute. I'm bragging on him. I know he's listening right now, but he has put his stamp on Blue Jay history with 4 specific traits, and I want you to hear these. Creating a culture of development and family, a propensity to shoot the three-pointer, the willingness to play any team, and his motion offense. And something that really stuck out to me is this culture at Creighton can be summarized by this simple fact. Since 2009-10 season, all but 2 players that have come to campus have earned a degree at Creighton. It's this balance of school and sports. And so I'm so excited to reconnect with a man. Again, I used to roam the halls and probably bug a little bit back when I was a baseball player, even though he was a basketball coach. But let me please introduce you without further ado to the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jim Flanery. Jim, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. How come you look 5 years older than you did 23 years ago, and I look 25 years older than I did 23 years ago?
Come on.
Yeah, it's good to reconnect.
So fun.
Creighton's a special place, and I know you had a good experience here, and just it's neat to reconnect and just to see the work that you're doing, because Lord knows we need help. There's a lot of great things about sport, as you know, and then there are a lot of areas where we're falling short and we can be better. And, we all make mistakes and we're all chasing something better, but there's a place for what you're doing in terms of just trying to help us all navigate the sport landscape, whether it's youth sports, high school sports, or the college level where I make my living, and or the professional level. And I was just talking to our volleyball coach. We went to lunch together, and I just said, things trickle up and they trickle down. What you see at the professional level trickles down to the youth level, and what we allow at the youth level, is still an issue at the professional level and all the way through high school and college. So we're never going to be perfect, but there's plenty of areas where we can improve.
Oh yeah. It's a continued evolution, right? As we grow as coaches, as players, and just continue to mature and get more information and things like that. And, I want to spend just a minute, if you could speak a little bit about kind of your coaching journey,
sure,
right? How you've gotten to this point, obviously, 23rd year at Creighton as the head coach, but I know you've got obviously a much more extensive background with that. But can you share with kind of the viewers today just a little about your background coaching, how you got to where you're at now?
Sure. Well, I went to Creighton. I walked onto the basketball team my last couple of years, actually. I was a late bloomer. I was 5'4" when I started high school, and 6'3" by the time I was a college freshman. So I went from a pretty pedestrian high school player at a small high school to, once I got to college and grew and was playing at the rec center every day. I got a lot better, and so I had the opportunity to walk on, much like you did at Creighton. So my last 2 years I walked on. I thought I wanted to go to law school out of Creighton, and couldn't quite pull the trigger. I was like, I'm going to wait a year, and then a year later I was still kind of dragging my feet, and I stumbled into some volunteer coaching here at Creighton kind of fell in love with it. And then I took a leap of faith. I went to a Division III college in Iowa, and got paid $3,500 a year, not $35,000, but $3,500 a year. This is in the early 90s.
I was thinking $3,500 a month, maybe, but no.
and was living in a dorm as a
wow.
Middle 20 something, and then after a couple of years at that Division III, I was given an opportunity to come back to Creighton and be an assistant coach. So I was an assistant coach for 10 years. The coach that I worked under, Connie Yorey, for those 10 years, then went to Nebraska, and I was fortunate enough to be hired as the head coach, and that was 22 years ago. So next year will be my 23rd year coaching as the head coach at Creighton, my 33rd year overall. And then I went to school here, so I'm kind of a lifer. But I stumbled into it. I always loved sports and thought I wanted to maybe do something in sports. I was actually started out in journalism. I thought, okay, I would want to be a sports reporter or call games on radio or television. And, like I said, stumbled into coaching and haven't looked back. And the great thing about coaching is you can wear sweats or shorts every day. And even before the pandemic, people dress differently now since the pandemic, but even before that, coaches were wearing shorts and sweats. So that fit my style too.
It is not a bad deal at all. I think I'm going to go out and see my alma mater baseball team play later today, and I'll be wearing shorts and hanging out with the boys in the dugout and things like that. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing you have to take advantage of.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, so I think that's really interesting, right? And one of the pictures I saw online recently was of you, and you had a shirt on that said culture. And when I talked about that in the intro, right, you're trying to establish this culture, right? So it's on and off the court. It's where, had that willingness to play any team. Like you're creating a culture. You've created a culture, right? And you look at even the last couple of years, I mean, you've been to 6 NCAA tournaments. You've had great runs. How do you view, establishing a culture within a program? How do you view that? How do you look at that? And I think one of the biggest challenges of coaching is how do you set the bar, if you will, and then maintain the bar? So how do you set the culture and maintain the culture? So how do you look at those kind of things from a coaching perspective?
Yeah, well, I think when I got into coaching, much like a lot of people, I got in because I loved the sport, and I couldn't, you can't kind of imagine being away from the sport. Like you're kind of addicted to the highs and even the lows, but then when you get in it and you see the impact that you can have on people and the connections, the ability to help educate them, then you're really sucked into it. It's not just, I love the sport. It's, I love being around young people. I love the opportunity to help them grow and make mistakes, but also, learn from those mistakes and make more mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And then when they're finished, they're still going to make mistakes as an adult, but they're more prepared to do that. Yes. And I think, so I think at some point I stumbled on the idea that, that trust kind of throughout the staff and throughout the roster is really just paramount to success, and it's paramount to the consistency that you're talking about, because we can all have that one recruiting class, or that one, if you're a high school coach, you've got that one class that's incredible. And then, oh, by the way, behind them, you don't have the level of athlete or whatever, but how do you be consistent? And I think, to me, you kind of settle into this notion that trust is huge. And so you need to be honest in your communication, but you need to be a good listener. I mean, I think that's a key piece of it. We talk a lot about communication, but it's also having the humility to listen. Sometimes as a coach, I don't know I can see what's going on the court, but I'll ask our players, what do you see? How do you want to defend this? And if you have built that trust, those things become easier questions. They become questions that your players are prepared to answer. And I think it's not easy. It's not a linear progression of, on day one we have level one, trust, and on day 10 we have level whatever. Yes. There's moments where we all fail, and you maybe lose a touch of that, and then you got to work to earn it. But it's an everyday thing. It's not once we have it, we don't have to think about it anymore. But it's an everyday thing. It's about meeting kids at their worst, and yes, pulling them out of that. Our former athletic director, Bruce Rasmussen, who just retired after, close to 30 years as our athletic director, he said to me one time, we so often in today's society, we judge people in their worst moments. That's kind of where we are as a society. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize you for your worst moment. And I think, boy, if we, anybody, if we do that, most of us are going to fall short, but we need to be forgiving. We need to understand that there's growth, and that growth is a part of all of us. But I think the listening piece and the development of trust, up and down your roster, from your best player to your player who's never going to see the court or the field, or barely going to see it, only maybe at the end of games, through your coaching staff, your strength coach for us, and our athletic trainer, and everybody who travels with us, or everybody who's a part of our program. It's like we're going to work to build a team that's cohesive and that can trust each other. And like I said, it's not easy. It's a lot like a marriage. You you can say, my wife and I have been happily married for 10 years. Well, that doesn't mean that in 5 more years you're going to be happily married, because you're going to have challenges, you're going to have obstacles, you're going to have things that are going to put stress on your marriage. Same thing with a team. You're going to have things, outside things, but even internal things where you're going to be stressed as a team. And it's not always from the opponent in the other dugout or the other sideline. It's a lot of times it's internal. It's jealousy. It's getting a little too hard. How do we, I'm going to complain because I'm not getting to play. And, so I think when you really work to build that trust and you make it a part of everybody's mentality, then you empower those, you empower your team, you empower your other coaches. As a head coach, I need to empower my assistant coaches. I need them to be able to act without coming to me every single little thing and saying, "Hey, Flan, what do you think?" Or what do I need to do here? Now, when it's really important, then we have a discussion. But if it's something little, I trust them. And same thing within our team. There are things in the locker room that you tell your leaders and your captains, and you say, "Hey, you handle that." Like, leadership is better coming from you than it is from. I don't want to give my age away, but it's better that a 20-year-old is telling a 20-year-old in our locker room, "Hey, this is not, you got to be better prepared for practice, or you got to do a better job with your nutrition, or you got to do a better job getting a good night's rest." Those things are better coming from their teammates than they are a 50-some-year-old coach.
Yes.
You want to empower those people, and that's a little trickier on a youth team, right? Because if you're asking a 13 or 15-year-old to police the locker room, that's a little different. Right. But there are still ways where you can empower young people to, "Hey, Teddy's really struggling right now. I'm talking to a baseball player, but he's 2 for his last 18, and he struck out 9 times. Put your arm around him, tell him he's going to be okay. Make sure, invite him to dinner, invite him to sit with him before the game, and because athletes struggle, and if you have a culture where in those moments you have other teammates reaching out and helping them, that makes all the difference. A few years ago, huge. I asked our team, I said, "How many of you," this is a college team I'm asking, "how many of you have ever had the thought of quitting the sport in your mind? And every single hand went up. And why is that? Because maybe it's a parent putting a lot of pressure on them. It's a coach that they didn't necessarily, think as highly of. It's two teammates were picking on them, all those things. So I think if you can really kind of push kids to help those who are struggling, that's huge. And for us, that's huge. We're vigilant about, trying to make sure that our freshmen are taken care of. You tell your seniors and your juniors, hey, do everything you can, because remember when you were a freshman and you were homesick and basketball was too hard and school was really hard. Okay, this kid's in that spot right now, and you need to be there for her and tell her it gets better and you belong here. And so I think it's about finding the people who are struggling, helping them, lifting them up, and then empowering people throughout your roster and throughout your staff.
Well, I think to your point, it sounds like you all talk a lot about this type of stuff, right? And one of the things that, I say openly about, me coming up through, high school and college, stuff like that, I struggled a lot with my confidence, right? In myself and things like that. And again, I was blessed with great parents and coaches, and there's nothing wrong there. I had people to lift me up, but it's this difference when you have to believe it yourself, right? And make that shift. And part of the other piece too is I also looked at asking for help as a sign of weakness,
right,
and not strength. And now clearly I'm more mature. I have kids now. I've grown up,
right,
and I have a different perspective on the world. And I understand that's completely false, right? Asking for help was a sign of strength,
right.
But with these things, it sounds like you talk about them a lot within the team, and you just kind of have those open discussions. Was that a strategic kind of move that you and the coaching staff make, saying we have to talk about these and this is how we're going to talk about them, and to make sure people understand the culture? Is it just it's second nature now because you've done it for so long? Like, how do you integrate that? Because I think sometimes when I thought the coaches, it can be difficult to have those conversations, or I also hear a lot of find the time to have those conversations.
Right. Well, my staff is really good at that. I mean, because I'm a college coach, I've got access to be able to hire really good assistant coaches. And my assistant coaches, they're younger, they're female, and they're in, they're going to say, hey, let's meet for coffee. So they'll, young people love Starbucks.
Yes, they do.
So,
yes, they do.
When you were on campus, Matt, we didn't have Starbucks. We have two now. We have two Starbucks on campus. So they'll say, hey, let's, once every 3 weeks, we're going to meet at Starbucks for an hour, and I'm going to ask you how everything else is going. We see each other and we know what's going on basketball wise, but there's that meeting them in other places. And I think my staff does a really good job of that. And they'll alert me, hey, so-and-so's struggling, so-and-so's doing great, but I think those are important meetings. And, if you don't, again, my staff does a really good job, I think, of making sure that those are regular. And they're, because if a kid's struggling, she may say, yeah, can we push it back a week or 2 weeks? And, what I want my staff member to say is maybe, well, let's push it back a day. If you have 2 tests today and you're stressed, let's not wait a week, or let's not wait 2 weeks, because then little problems become big problems. And I think that's part of coaching. And I learned the hard way. My 4th year as a head coach, full disclosure, full honesty, like I let little things become big. I'm not always the greatest at confrontation. It's all leaders have areas where they're stronger than others. And I let little things become big things, assuming nobody would notice, which was not a smart thing, because
I've done that too.
They're very intuitive, and they're you can't say, well, they're not going to notice. Well, they noticed, and it was a real struggle that year, and it was a good learning experience for me. I had to make some changes. I had to say, look, I'm never going to necessarily be great at confrontation, but I have to at least be functional there. I have to at least be able to say, look, this isn't good. We have to make it. We have to nip it before it gets bigger. And
Yes.
I don't think I'd be the coach I am today if I maybe hadn't gone through that and been forced to say, look, this is a weakness, address it. Just like players sometimes, and you got to be careful. But like, hey, you're being a little bit stubborn here. Let's talk about it. Why are you being stubborn about? And it might not be the basketball court. It might be you missed a class, or
Yes.
Brad in the weight room says that you're really not in. You need to get stronger, but he says your effort in the weight room is not great, or it's hit or miss.
Yes.
So those conversations need to be had. Not every time something pops up, but when it becomes a little bit of a pattern, then you need to have it. And you don't have to use a tone that, you can use a tone that's understanding. You can use a tone that says, hey, what's going on in the rest of your life that you're not practicing as well, or, that you're not quite as focused, or you're being a little bit, less of a good teammate. I haven't seen you, high-fiving your teammates as much. Those things you got to pick up on, and we don't, but I think we don't. Not everybody in your staff might do it, but if one or two people on your staff can pick up on that and alert everybody, then
Yes.
then we all get that person, that team member to back to normal more quickly,
Yes.
maybe. But just being a listener, being an observer, I think, and that's where I'm truly fortunate to have the staff that I do, because like I said, when I'm running a practice as the head coach, there are cues in terms of my team's behavior that I don't always see, because I'm like, okay, what's the next drill, and what are my talking points, and what am I going to try to teach, and they can take a little breather and look around and say, okay, who's engaged, who's not engaged. So I think, just like I said, empowering the people around you, but also empowering especially your older team members. But even sometimes, and you've coached, Matt, so you know this, like sometimes your older players, in a lot of ways, they know the routine and that, but sometimes they put more pressure on themselves than younger players, because, it's my senior year and I want to make it the best ever. And, to go back to baseball, I haven't had a hit for 4 games, or in basketball,
Right.
I'm 2 for my last 23 from the 3-point line. And so sometimes it's a younger player telling an older player, hey, just relax, you're great. I've learned so much from you. So it isn't always older to younger. Sometimes even younger players can have a role in that.
Yes. Well, I think to your point, it's that, creating a culture of openness, caring, and I think genuine caring about your teammates, right? If we want to pick them up when they're down, we want to encourage them when they're up, and just notice certain things and have a conversation about it. And I loved what you said earlier. If a teammate looks at another teammate, and remind them that you belong here.
Yeah.
And that statement right there, I think, is so powerful, because sometimes we all need it, right? And we have to tell ourselves eventually and believe it ourselves. But to have a teammate say that you belong here is a massive thing. That doesn't mean you don't have to go to work. You don't have to get better. You're not going to improve. You're not going to work on this or that or get stronger in the weight room, but it's you belong. Now let's get to work.
Right.
And I love that culture.
One thing,
go ahead, Jim.
One thing that occurred to me when you're saying that is, even as a coach, I think this is important, is to separate the act from the person. And this is something I think I'm better at than I used to be. And I tell our players all the time, like, criticism is not personal. It's designed to make us better. Like, if you want to be coached, if you want to be the best you can be, I understand we're all defensive when we get criticized. And, so you got to be careful with that. But, a few years ago, we had a couple freshmen who were jogging down the floor in transition defense, and I called them lazy. And then I thought about it for a second, and the next dead ball, I said there was 2 of them, and I said, look, I'm sorry I called you lazy. You're not lazy. You don't get to Division I basketball by being lazy.
Yes.
That's, I said, but on that particular play, that was a lazy play. So part of that's because you got to be careful as a coach nowadays, because they're going to maybe run home and tell dad or mom that you called him lazy. But hey, that's a lazy play, or we're better than this, or you're better than this, or we're not rebounding right now. You're not a good rebounder, but right now we're not rebounding, and we're not valuing rebounding, or you're being stubborn about this. So I think it's important, as because you do need to be delicate, but separate the act of, hey, you're not giving great effort, not, hey, you guys are lazy, because they're not lazy. They're not. But all athletes and even coaches, there's times where I'm a little less prepared than I should be. That's on me. And I don't mind if somebody tells me that. And I hope that they don't mind that. But it's not that they're lazy, or that it's just, we all have
at that moment.
Yeah,
right
we
now.
all have moments where we don't work quite as hard as we should. I mean, we talked to our players about, the idea that you're ever going to give 100%, is a little misleading, because it's hard to say, well, geez, did I run the floor as hard as I could every single time? Did I offensive rebound as hard as I could every single time? I mean, that's not realistic to say that I gave 100%. So maybe you strive for 90, because it actually opens you up to saying, even if you had the best game of your life, you're like, well, yeah, but there were a couple of times where there was a loose ball and I didn't really go after it. But I do think those things are important.
I agree. I love this concept of we have to be very careful about the words we use, and I do it. And even having kids, and whether you're kids of your own or coaching, whatever, it's like you reminded me of my wife and I work on this, where when we're talking to one of our children, maybe they're not acting very nice right now, instead of like calling them a jerk or something like that, or you're mean, or it's right now you are not acting the right way, or you're not right now, you're not acting nice. How do we correct that? Right. So to your point, it's separating that action from the person. I think that I love that phrase, because I think that's such, like, that's it. That's gold right there. Right. So when you, even to your point, like that concept of confrontation, like, I don't like confrontation. I don't really know anyone who does like conversation
right.
or confrontation. And, people will say like, well, I have to have this difficult conversation, or we have this confrontation, stuff like that. And I'm like, well, first of all, that makes me want to crawl up in a corner.
Yeah.
Because a difficult conversation sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. And it's just that slight thing of like, okay, what if we like stop putting labels on the person, stop putting labels on the situation, and just say it's a conversation, or it's an action that's happening right now.
Right.
Not this like massive thing. And I think it's a skill to be learned from a coaching perspective. I think that can be learned, and there's an art to that.
Right.
Which
absolutely. Because there are times where it's sport. You need to ratchet up the intensity. You need to get a kid to go a little bit harder. And sometimes you do need to change your tone, but you also need to make sure that it doesn't come across as personal. But like, hey, I've told you 3 times you need to block out, and that's 3 times in a row that you didn't block out. What do I need to say to get you to block out? And there's a time to be calm, and then there's a time to be. But then I always think at the end of practice, you can still put your arm around that kid. Like, you can still say, look, maybe I can handle that differently next time. I've done this a lot. I could have handled that better. But I said, I got to get you got to tell me how I can get you to do this a higher percentage of the time or more consistently. Because if you don't give me that answer, then I'm still searching to find ways to get you there. And so you either have to be okay with me coaching you a little harder, or you have to tell me how I can get you there quicker.
Ooh, I love that. It's that like partnership, right?
Yeah.
That you're establishing with the players to say, we're in this together, so we need to learn from each other. And I think that's such a great question to ask, like, players I always like to ask them, like, how are you best motivated? Or when you were at your best, like having the best season or best run,
right?
Or best, free throw percentage or shooting percentage, like whatever it was, like, how was the coach involved, or what were you doing? Like, what did the coach tell you or say to you, or what did I say to you? Maybe did I do something during that stretch that was helpful? Like, I don't know, but just that partnership. And I think it's interesting. Athletes sometimes don't know how to respond to that at first, but when you create that culture and ask over and over and over again, it starts to become just part of the normal conversation that you're having.
Sure.
So good. So let me ask you this, because, last year, this was past year, not too long ago, watching the team play in the NCAA tournament and, take down some good teams and, almost pull out one against UCLA and lost by 2, if I remember right. And a lot of times, so first of all, 2 questions. One, what was so special about that team where you were able to make a run like that, even the past 2 years? Like, what was so special and different about those teams that maybe were different than other teams you've had in the past? I'll ask my second question in a minute.
Sure. Well, this past year we started 5 seniors, and so I mean we expected to be good, and health is a big thing. I mean we had a couple players get hurt, but in terms of the players who are veterans, they were mostly healthy. That's obviously huge, but really proud of the consistency of our group. This last year we were 26-6. And like you said, we actually lost by 4 to UCLA, but it was a really close game.
Yes.
2 of our losses were to Connecticut, who made the Final Four. So I just think we had a maturity about us, and our players did a good job of being unselfish. I mean, unselfishness is huge, but staying together, to go back to what you said earlier about retaining players and having players who want to be at Creighton for 4 years versus want to be here for 1 year and then go somewhere else and then go somewhere else. So that's not easy, but I just think I think we had a group that kind of believed in each other, but bottom line is we had pretty good talent, and we had a lot of experience and different ways to win. When you have experience, even when you don't have your best, your kids can figure out how to win. And I think that was a hallmark of this team.
Yes. When you look at some of the games you've played over the last couple of years, a lot of times that we go into these games, and it doesn't matter if you're at high school, college, or professional level, but there's pressure that comes with it, right? And especially when you start getting to the NCAA tournament, I mean, it's the big dance. Like, it's, wow, only 60-14. I mean, it's amazing, right? It's this whole to-do, and the rise of especially women's basketball now is like unbelievable, and it's just on this rocket ship.
Yeah.
And so there can be pressure that comes with it. When you look at like dealing with pressure, when you look at the concept of pressure, when you look at just even an NCAA tournament of like going down, coming back, like going up, having a lead and maintaining the lead, like the pressure that comes with it, how do you and your coaching staff and even players like deal with that pressure? How do you look at that? How do you make sure, like, in the moment, as best you can, that you control it, it doesn't control you? Yeah,
that's a great phrase. You control it, and it's difficult. I mean, first of all, you're honest about the pressure that the NCAA tournament has versus a regular season game. Look, when that ball gets thrown up on Saturday in this past tournament against UNLV, everybody's going to be more nervous. Coaches are going to be more nervous. You guys are going to be more nervous. UNLV players are going to be more nervous. UNLV coaches are going to be more nervous. So trust each other. Look at one another. Maybe smile. And we did a quick breathing. Right before we go out for the jump ball, I'm like, okay, close your eyes. Let's all take 3 deep breaths. Okay, just to, one of our sports psychology guys he's huge into just getting them to breathe a little bit, and could knock all the bad, as a baseball player, if you get up there and you've got 12 things going through your head, you're not going to hit the ball.
Correct.
You need 1 thing, maybe 2 things, right? And it's the same in basketball. You can't walk out there thinking 13 different things. But I think when you play in an NCAA tournament, you're a little bit more, as a coach, I'm a little bit more aware of that. For instance, against UNLV, 2 of our 3 best players got off to a rocky start. And you tell your staff right before that, hey, let's just keep an eye on who's too nervous and who's appropriately nervous, And
yes.
I did something I don't think I'd done it all year. I took both of them out at the same time for not very long. I mean, it was 4.5 to 5 minutes in the game. I took them both out. Usually we had three players average over 15 a game. So we usually tried to make sure that two of them were on the floor at the same time, and
Yes.
especially early in the game when everybody else is more nervous. But they were both a little jittery. I took them out for a couple minutes, and we had a senior come in and hit 2 threes, come off the bench and hit 2 threes. And I'm like, okay, well, it's her day. But I think just
sit
right.
there. Just sit there.
But you have to kind of know that. But you also, when I took them out, in my mind, I'm not taking them out for 10 minutes of game time. I'm taking them out for a couple minutes, just clear their head, get them back, watch a couple possessions, a few possessions, and then they're ready to go again. But I think you have a little bit more vigilance about when those games are a little bit more high pressure and high stakes. Just be a little bit more aware of who's showing nerves. Because I say this a lot. Athletics is about having enough nervousness that shows you care, but not so much nervousness and nerve that you're paralyzed and can't play freely. Because you need to be able to do both. You need to be able to be focused, right? If you're not focused and we said, hey, this player can only go to a right hand, and the first 3 possessions you're guarding her, she beat you to her right hand 3 times. Well, you clearly weren't focused, but at the same time, you got to play free and relaxed, and it's finding that balance. Athletics that's what's great about one of the great things about it. It's like taking a test. If you go into a test saying, oh, and you didn't prepare and you don't care, you're probably not going to do very well. But Correct. If you go into a test and you're super, super, super stressed, you're going to do equally poorly, right? Athletics is the same thing. If you're too stressed, you're not going to perform well. If you're not a little bit stressed and a little bit nervous, it means you maybe don't care quite enough, because I need you to know that kid can only drive it with her right hand. And if you're just out there playing and you can't figure that out, then it's going to be hard to play you, even if unless you're making baskets left and right, So I think in high pressure situations, you just try to be a little bit more vigilant about, maybe giving a kid a quick breather or having something appropriate to say to them to get them to relax.
I like that. It's kind of that pattern interrupt a little bit, right? Within that too. I know I'm going to stay out here, and then all of a sudden you're pulled out and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. And then lets the brain calm a little bit, right? I know every sport's different. You can't necessarily. You can't do that in baseball. I can't. Yeah, it's harder in different sports. Yeah. But to your point, like, what's the pattern interrupt that gets their brain reset? Right. That's why I love breathing so much. I mean, well, two things. One is, I always tell people, like, if you look at nervousness, I love this topic, because if you look at the research behind it, the body has the same physiological reaction if you're nervous versus excited. Yeah. So my heart starts beating faster, stomach's a little weird, maybe I start sweating, all that sort of stuff, right? Right. At the end of the day, it's kind of like, well, let's call a spade a spade. This is what we're feeling right now, but understand and then shift the mindset. Are you nervous or are you excited? I mean, there's a difference from like going forward or pulling back type thing. So I always love that concept. And then the breathing thing I love too, because if you study the science behind it, like, you can go into fight or flight response in these situations, these pressure situations. And by breathing, they've again proven that when you're fight or flight, your prefrontal cortex shuts off, which means the logical part of your brain shuts off, which means if you breathe, you can actually literally physiologically turn it back on. Right. And I love that breathing stuff. I think it's so powerful. I know we got a couple minutes left here. Let me ask you one last question here. Again, we could talk all day. We talked for probably 30 minutes yesterday or day before getting ready. So let me ask you this question, because obviously you guys are recruiting different individuals out of high school. You are going in the portal, or you have transfers come in from other schools. All these things are happening, right? Yeah. What advice would you give to athletes who want to move from the high school to college level, right? What does it take? What are you looking for? What advice would you give them? Yeah, I think more and more you look at resiliency, right? I mean, the
the catchphrase is, at least a couple of years ago, it was grit, and now it's maybe grit, maybe resiliency, but like as an athlete, you're gonna fail. I mean, there's like it's especially when you get to this level. I mean, everybody's trying to win, everybody's good, and you've got to be able to bounce back from a bad practice or a bad part of a practice. I said, we just talked about hitting reset. Can a freshman, even within a practice, hit reset? Can they overcome, hey, I just got my butt kicked by that senior today. And you know what? I might get my butt kicked tomorrow, but my goal is to keep getting better every day, not to be where she is as a senior, but to get better every day. So I think it's the ability to see process, to be resilient. Competitiveness is huge. I mean, I think obviously whatever sport it is, you have to have at least a baseline of athleticism and a baseline skill set, unless your athleticism is off the charts. And then we think, well, we can get you there from a skill and a technique standpoint. But if assuming you're kind of in the ballpark, both athletically and skill wise, I want to see somebody who competes. And that's harder nowadays, right, Matt? Because think about it, whether you're in youth baseball or youth basketball, and for basketball, these kids play 5 games a weekend a lot of times in their club, on their club team. So I lost my 10 o'clock game. Wow, I got a game at 2. I lost my 2 o'clock game. Oh, I got a game again at 6 tonight. Well, when I was growing up, you got to play on Fridays. And so on Mondays, you were excited for that game on Friday. Well, you're not quite as excited when you get to play as many games in the sports that these kids get to play. They get to play over 100 games a year, depending on their sport. So again, I don't expect them to show the exact same competitiveness if they were only playing once a week, but you still want to say, okay, which kids are really, really competing? Because you're not always going to, as I said earlier, you're not always going to have your best. How good are you on your worst day? How good are you do you still give effort? Do you still, and I say this a lot of times. Once I've seen what I said in terms of the athleticism and the skill level, I want to see you play poorly one time, because I want to see what's your body language. How do you interact with your coach? How do you interact with your teammates? Are you looking up in the stands at your parents every time you strike out or every time you miss a free throw? Because that tells me a lot about who you are too, because you're going to play bad games in college. And what we consider is you're going to shoot the ball poorly, or you're going to strike out 3 times in a game, or you're going to, all those things. So who are you going to be in those moments? Because that's going to tell you at the end of the day what kind of career you have and how successful you can be at the college level.
What a great response. I love that answer. Love that answer. So your college coaches, everybody listen, all athletes listening, like they want to see you play your worst.
One time. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see you do it 10 times in a row, because that means you're probably not a very good player. But I do want to see you struggle. I want to see you struggle. Yes. I want to see how you handle struggle. Because if I only watch you play 3 times and you make threes every game, you're bouncing around and your body language is good and you're a good teammate, but that's not real life. LeBron and Steph shoot the ball poorly on given nights, and what are they doing? How good are they on the nights where they don't shoot it well? Yes.
Oh, it's so good. That's where quality of leadership comes out, and the mindset that you have that, again, gives you information to continue to improve. I think that's great. And for you coaches listening as well, what a great thing. If you're not looking already, look for that and start seeing, potentially gather some more information on the types of players that you have and maybe where they can improve as well. So good. All right. I know we're at time. I want to be aware of your time. And I'm so thankful that you carved out this, 45 minutes, an hour for us to chat and talk about these things. And maybe I'll have you back again, Coach. I still can't call you Jim. I don't think I've ever called you Jim, and it's so odd to me to even call you Jim. So I'm just going to say Coach or Flan. But But thank you so much for taking your time today. And we'll put links if you want to connect with Coach Flanery on Twitter and kind of some other areas as well. But if nothing else, flip on the TV, watch a Creighton women's basketball game this year, because they're going to be good as we go into the next year. So with that, Coach, thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to hopefully see you live in person in Omaha one of these days. Okay.
Sounds great, Matt. I really enjoyed it, and I would come on this anytime. Anybody who knows me knows I can talk. So these are fun. These are fun for me.
I love it. All right. So with that, thank you all for joining today. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you go check out the other interviews that we have with what we call our athletic titans, our coaches and our athletes at the collegiate and pro level. As the saying goes, success leaves clues. So go learn and implement what you learn, and you'll see a massive impact on the performance of your student athletes if you happen to coach, and of just you in everyday life. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in the next interview.